the Grammy Awards, and this is what she said.
As the first woman to win Album of the Year at the Grammys twice, I want to say to all the young women out there, there are going to be people along the way who will try to undercut your success or take credit for your accomplishments or your fame. But if you just focus on the work and you don't let those people sidetrack you, someday when you get where you're going, you'll look around and you will know that it was you and the people who love you who put you there. And that will be the greatest feeling in the world. Thank you for this.
So there's been unanimous applause. Susan, Taylor Swift is phenomenally strong-minded and talented, obviously. Is focusing on the work enough for other women? Or do they need men who buy into a change of culture, mentor, champion?
Oh, God.
All those things.
I'm going to sound like, I'm not going to get a good reaction here, but I remember working with an American woman who did exactly the opposite. Every time she proofread someone's report who didn't write English as a first language, she claimed credit for the report. So I'm kind of like, it's not just women who get hurt by that sort of behaviour that she's referring to. It's actually kind of across gender. So I'm not, I've seen women behave really, really badly to their male work colleagues. So in finance, maybe that's just in finance, I don't know.
An unexpected reply.
I know, which is why I'm like, oh my God, that's not going to be very popular. But I think it is important to put in perspective what she's talking about is someone claiming credit for someone else's work. Well, that's disgusting wherever it happens. And is it more likely to happen to women? I don't know. My experience is no. I have to say no.
The woman in the office today, I think, thought yes.
Did they?
Based on an unscientific and hasty survey.
Because, I've always worked in finance, and it's a very male-dominated field, and I've never really had any trouble. So I'm biased in that way, I guess. But,
The other side to this, of course, everyone is saying that was a direct comment to Kanye, who's come out and put some pretty horrible lyrics involving Taylor Swift and has, of course, been on the stage and interrupted her awards in the past. And the other sad thing to think about throughout of this, would that have come up on worldwide news sources as a story today if it hadn't had that Kanye tangent or angle,
Yeah. I suppose that was a factor.
Which is a shame as well.
Speaking of awards ceremonies, the New Zealander of the Year awards tonight in Auckland. Richie McCaw, Rob Fenwick, Louise Nicholas. Who would be your New Zealander of the Year, please, before we go? Not necessarily from this list. Do you have any thoughts?
Where's Lydia Ko? She's fantastic, isn't she?
Okay, so she's getting your vote.
Yes.
I thought maybe the would be a late entry from the Waitangi Day accessory, but that hasn't shown up.
Yes. No, that hasn't shown up. And thank God no one's 3D printing those in bulk, Clark.
What a tough competition to judge, though. Apples, oranges and bananas, really, isn't it?
Yeah, 3 fine contenders. All right, well, that's tonight in Auckland, the New Zealander of the Year Awards. Thank you to Susan Guthrie, who's been on the panel today. Thanks, Susan.
Okay, you're welcome. Good to talk.
Good to talk to you, and very nice to have you back as well, Clark Ayford.
Jim.
Thanks for your company, everybody, and Checkpoint with John Campbell shortly.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell. On behalf of the Checkpoint team, thank you for joining us. Tonight, Serco, Mount Eden and Corrections, has the buck found somewhere to stop? The uncertain state of jobs in the country's meatworks. Is the government in crisis mode about the flag referendum? And what was the caucus meeting Maggie Barry organised to discuss it? The man at the helm of a Taranaki iwi, when it lost much of its treaty settlement money, now wants to be a trustee for the same iwi. And the weather, how bad will the next couple of days be? All that and more over the next 90 minutes. But first, here's Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Goers have been exposed to a man who refused to be quarantined for the measles. The Auckland Regional Public Health Service says he was infected by a passenger who was seated on a flight from China that arrived in Auckland on January the 30th. Let me turn my mic on, that might help. It's not going at all. I'm
Have
very sorry
mine.
about that.
Time
Hang
to
on,
give you
no,
mine.
it's on now.
Let's start that again, shall we? Right. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Hundreds of people in central Auckland, including Sky City casino goers, have been exposed to a man who refused to be quarantined for the measles. The Auckland Regional Public Health Service says he was infected by a passenger he was seated near on a flight from China that arrived in Auckland on January the 30th. It says the man visited Sky City Casino on February the 9th and Sugar Tree Apartments between February the 9th and 13th. A medical officer of health, Dr. Richard Hoskins, says the man was told to go into quarantine and he had no idea he would not obey that instruction. He says by the time they became aware, it was too late. The Department of Corrections Chief Executive has taken personal responsibility for problems at former Serco-run Mount Eden prison, where violent attacks and fight clubs broke out. Ray Smith appeared before the Law and Order Select Committee today as part of the department's annual review. Labour's Phil Goff says the private operator Serco did a disastrous job and asked Mr Smith who took responsibility for that. Mr Smith told MPs things could have been handled better, but the prison is now performing well.
I take responsibility. Let me finish. I'm the most accountable person in the Department of Corrections, and I've never, not once, not fronted on an issue that has happened in our organisation. I take accountability for the things that happen in the system and in the wider system.
Ray Smith says the Corrections Department will always face difficulties, and the important thing is to address those challenges. The Social Development Minister is rejecting a claim Child, Youth and Family is massaging child abuse statistics to achieve targets she has set. In its annual State of the Nation report, the Salvation Army says some government departments are so focused on meeting targets they've become willfully ignorant of the effect of policies and are doing the bidding of their ministers. And Tolley says the government has set bold targets and does thorough evaluation of its policy outcomes.
Nobody who works in child, youth and family, one of the most difficult jobs out there in government, turns up at work every day to cook the books, to make a minister look good. They're there to make sure that children are kept safe, and it's an insult to those people.
The Social Development Minister, Anne Tolley. A group of government MPs met this morning to try to drum up more public support to change the flag. But they're adamant it wasn't a crisis meeting, and they say it's not panicking about the result of next month's referendum. Recent polls have suggested the public remains largely opposed to changing the flag, although the government spent $26 million on 2 referendums. The Prime Minister John Campbell says it was simply a meeting of politicians who support change.
So some MPs have said they support change, some don't, but some like-minded ones actually like the idea of seeing, how they can continue to garner support. There's nothing new. We meet on that stuff all the time.
John Key. The second referendum will be held next month, where voters will choose between the current flag and the blue and black silver fern flag designed by Kyle Lockwood. The man at the helm of a Taranaki iwi when it lost much of its treaty settlement money is seeking election as a trustee for the tribe. Former National Party candidate Greg White was the chief executive when the iwi lost millions of dollars in bad investments. Our Māori Issues correspondent Mihi Narangi Forbes reports.
Some say Greg White has been elusive since then, but Mr White says he's been upfront and now he's standing for the tribal board. However, seeing his name pop up on the voting papers has angered some. Archdeacon Tiki Tūterangi Raumati says at 79 he's too old to get involved in iwi politics, but that doesn't stop him watching closely from the sideline. He says the loss of much of the tribe's treaty money is still raw and Mr White should stay away. 8 people are standing for the 7 seats on the Runanga, with voting Saturday week. This is Mihi Narangi Forbes.
The Tertiary Education Commission has told Parliament's Education and Science Select Committee it's preparing to write off nearly $9 million owed by institutions that delivered less teaching than they were paid for. It says the chances of getting repayments from Manaakitanga Aotearoa Charitable Trust and Agribusiness Training were low. It also told the Select Committee it cannot protect staff who blow the whistle on rorts at tertiary institutions, and it's up to institutions' governing boards to ensure funding is used properly. An Auckland councillor says a report suggesting Muruwai, Mahurangi and Kaipara harbours should be considered as alternative sites for Auckland's port is batty. The port's future study, set up by the Auckland Mayor, Len Brown, today released its long list of port locations that could work from a purely technical perspective. The long list names 12 areas, including blue sky options not considered before. The Waitemata Ward Councillor Mike Lee says some of the suggestions should not have even got as far as the long list. Instead, he says the focus should be on making the current port more efficient without expanding further into Waitemata Harbour. In sport, the captain of the Kiwis Rugby League team, Simon Mannering, is stepping down from his role as captain of the New Zealand Warriors. After 6 seasons at the helm of the National Rugby League side, the 29-year-old Mannering is being replaced by the 32-year-old Australian Ryan Hoffman. Mannering, who's led the Warriors a record 136 times, says he's giving up the captaincy to focus on playing. He'll captain the Warriors for the last time on Saturday in his hometown of Nelson, where the Warriors play their final pre-season game against St George Illawarra. The New Zealand pace bowler Doug Bracewell has been ruled out of the second cricket test against Australia due to a shoulder injury. He'll be replaced by either Neil Wagner or Matt Henry, who didn't play in New Zealand's defeat in the first test at the Basin Reserve. The pace bowler Trent Boult is hoping for bowler-friendly conditions at Hagley Oval for the second test, which starts on Saturday.
As a bowler, I'd love to see it a lot greener, of course, as well. That way you can get a bit more swing and a lot more seam off the wicket. But hopefully there is still a tinge of green there, and if we can control the toss, hopefully get in a good position on morning one and put some pressure on them.
The New Zealand bowler Trent Boult. The All Blacks and Māori All Blacks will play a double-header in Chicago in November. New Zealand Rugby says the All Blacks will play Ireland at Soldier Field on the 5th of November, and the day after the Māori play the United States. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Dr. Natalie Robinson on the Great Antarctic Paradox, why winter sea ice is expanding in what appears to be a warming ocean. We have a window on the world of Tropicalia, the Brazilian sound that swept the planet 50 years ago. And this week's overseas correspondent is Johnny Blades from Radio New Zealand International, pondering the possibility of 2 new nations on our doorstep, figuratively speaking, on nights after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather to midnight tomorrow for the northern half of the North Island. That's from Taranaki and Taupo northwards, including Bay of Plenty. Periods of rain, some heavy falls from tonight and isolated thunderstorms tomorrow. Rain clearing in Taranaki tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain about the ranges. A few falls spreading elsewhere. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairarapa. Occasional rain easing to a few showers and increasing fine spells tomorrow. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, periods of heavy thundery rain with localised torrential falls. Marlborough and Canterbury, rain with heavy falls and thunderstorms near the Western Ranges and Marlborough Sounds. Scattered falls elsewhere, but long fine spells tomorrow. Otago and Southland, periods of rain with heavy thundery falls today, especially about central Otago. Further rain near the Western Ranges tomorrow, but long fine spells elsewhere. The Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It is now 5:09.
Thank you so much, Katrina. We are going to go straight to the story that is just breaking this evening. Hundreds of people in central Auckland, including Sky City casino goers and I presume staff, have been potentially exposed to a person who refused to be quarantined for the measles. This is what Katrina was just telling us in the news. The Auckland Regional Public Health Service says this person caught the measles from a passenger he was seated near on a flight from China that arrived in Auckland on January the 30th. It says this person visited Sky City Casino on February the 9th and Sugar Tree Apartments, which is actually not that far away from us here at RNZ, between February the 9th and 13th. A medical officer of health, Dr. Richard Hoskins, joins me now. Dr. Hoskins, do we know how many people this person came in contact with? Do we know where he went other than the Sugar Tree Apartments and the Sky City Casino? This seems all fairly broad brushstroke at the moment.
So yes and no, or no and yes to your questions. Exactly how many people they came in contact with, no, although we do know from other places that we haven't named in that media release the names of the people that we need to contact.
Why haven't you named those places?
Well, we don't need to. We can contact the people directly.
Right. How can you contact the people directly?
We have their phone numbers, email addresses, etc.
So this person, whoever they are, went to Sky City Casino and Sugar Tree only, and everywhere else they went to, you are fully aware of where they were and who they were dealing with?
that's the information we have. Yes. So we contacted this person on the 9th and said that they needed to stay in quarantine until we knew whether they were immune or not. And that evening, for their own reasons, they decided to go to the Sky City Casino from about 10 p.m. till about 11 p.m.
Okay. Did anyone call them the next day or the day after and say, hey, how are you going with the quarantine?
That's what we do, and we found out it was 2 days later that we called them that they were, one, now symptomatic, so they had a fever and were feeling unwell, and two, that they hadn't been complying with the quarantine. And there are things that we do when we find that out, but obviously this was too late in this instance.
So how strongly is it stressed what a quarantine involves and how important it is?
Oh, we're very clear with people what it involves. Not only do we tell them, but we also have written information available on our website.
So this person is what? Cavalier, reckless?
It's not up for me to say. All I can say is that for their own reasons, they decided not to follow the instructions we've given them.
Okay. What is the likelihood of transmission in the sort of circumstances that you are more aware of than we are?
Right, well, measles is really, really infectious. It's an airborne virus, so it's tiny and it floats in the air and it can persist on surfaces. And we know that on average in a population with no immunity, one person with measles will infect 16 to 18 other people. And we've had instances here in New Zealand, for instance, 2 years ago, when one person with measles in a school infected over 25 people the first time round. And so it's incredibly infectious.
So do you think it's likely this person has infected others? It seems on the balance of probabilities extremely likely that he's infected at least some people.
Yes.
Okay.
I think there's a very good chance he's infected some
Right. So what should people who have been in those parts of Auckland be looking out for?
The first thing is that those people who've been in those places need to look out and find out whether they're immune themselves or not. They can check with their doctor whether they've had a blood test in the past that shows they're immune, or had the 2 measles vaccines, or indeed had measles, the illness themselves. And then if they're not immune, they need to be in quarantine as of now. And
even if they're not symptomatic?
Even if they're not symptomatic. You can spread measles before you know you're sick.
Wait a sec. So sorry, are you seriously saying that everyone who was in the Sky City Casino on February the 9th, or the Sugar Tree Apartments, who is not immune to measles, should put themselves in quarantine?
On February the 9th, between 9:45 p.m. and 12 midnight.
And the Sugar Tree Apartments between February the 9th and 13th?
Yes.
That they should quarantine themselves, even if there are no symptoms, if they are not immune?
Yes. And then take steps to find out whether they're immune or not.
How would you take those steps if you were quarantined? How would you go about doing that?
Right. Well, so and what we did for this person is we actually organised for somebody to go to where they were staying and take a blood sample to test for measles immunity.
Right. Sorry, I'm just getting to grips with this now. This is quite big, isn't it? I mean, if you are looking at quarantining people who are in the Sugar Tree Apartments, which is a fairly big old complex, and telling them to stay at home until you can get people to come and see them, this is quite a big deal.
Well, not everybody will need a blood test, but yes, it is a big deal.
Boy, public health is about people behaving responsibly, isn't it? And I mean, this person has demonstrably let the side down in the face of advice to others. How do you persuade other people now who may or may not have it, who may not have a clue, may not be presenting any symptoms, to do the right thing?
Well, hopefully by getting this sort of information out, by talking about the fact that measles can be a very severe illness for some people, and if absolutely necessary, we do have some powers under the Health Act to require people to stay in isolation or quarantine.
Okay, what are the symptoms? When you start presenting with the symptoms, which are sometime after exposure, obviously, what are the obvious ones?
The first symptoms don't come less than a week after exposure. Usually it's about 14 days from exposure till the time you get the rash, but you can be up to 4 days before you get the rash with a fever, runny red eyes, a cough or a sneeze. And then the rash, which comes out and starts on the face and then spreads kind of over the trunk and down the arms and legs over the next few days.
Okay. Right, can we end then with your public health advice, Dr. Richard Hoskins? If you were in Sky City Casino on February the 9th between 9 and 10 p.m, or you are in the Sugar Tree Apartments and you were there between February the 9th and 13th and you don't have an immunity to measles, as far as you're aware, what should you do?
You need to stay in quarantine at the moment. If you're sick, you need to seek advice and do that by phone first, either with Healthline or by phoning your GP so that you don't go out and expose somebody else. And then you need to contact either your GP or us for us to organise this blood test for you to see whether you are immune or not.
And when you say us, how do they go about contacting you? Where do they get those details from?
So they'll get those details either by calling the doctor or by phoning us during normal hours on 09623 4600. With nothing we can do about it after hours.
Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Richard Hoskins. Thank you very much indeed for your time this evening. We appreciate that, and all those details will be up on our website in the not too distant future if you're a bit bewildered about whether it applies to you. 17 minutes past 5. All of this is breaking news this evening. Right, the Department of Corrections Chief Executive has for the first time taken personal responsibility for the handling of the former Serco-run Mount Eden prison, where violent attacks and fight clubs broke out. Ray Smith appeared before the Law and Order Select Committee today as part of the department's annual review. Here is our political reporter, Amelia Langford.
Ray Smith faced questioning from Labour, the Green Party and New Zealand First over Auckland's Mount Eden prison and whether the department failed in its oversight of the facility. Labour's Phil Goff says the private operator Serco did a disastrous job and asked Mr Smith who took responsibility for that. Mr Smith told MPs things could have been handled better.
I take responsibility. Let me finish. I'm the most accountable person in the Department of Corrections, and I've never, not once, not fronted on an issue that has happened in our organisation. I take accountability for the things that happen in the system and in the wider system.
Mr Smith told the committee that the corrections system will always face difficulties and the important thing is to address those challenges. He says he did just that when he stepped in to run Mount Eden Prison in July.
Do not underestimate the day that I went to Auckland and told those hundreds of people there that we were taking over the running of the prison. That was a big deal. We did it well. We've managed the transition well. The prison is performing well. And I'm very, very, very proud of the people that we put in there and the job that they have done working alongside their Serco colleagues.
Mr Smith says it's his reputation on the line, but he now has confidence in Mount Eden Prison. The Green Party's corrections spokesperson, David Clendon, says while it's Mr Smith's role to step up, it's now about ensuring there is sufficient investment in rehabilitation and reintegration programs.
I respect the view that he has taken it on the chin. He is the Chief Executive and it's appropriate, but we're more concerned with actually resolving these problems and whose fault it was or who's got responsibility for it.
Labour's Calvin Davis is not impressed with Mr Smith's mea culpa. He says if he were a prisoner in Mount Eden Prison, he still wouldn't feel safe.
Only time will tell whether the situation has been remedied because we're not really seeing the statistics and the data coming out. I'm still hearing stories about issues in all prisons. They're not as serious as what they were previously when Serco was running the show, but there's still issues and it is a constant job to keep on top of these things.
Mr Davis says he's also worried about New Zealand's rising prison population and the prospect of more double bunking to meet demand.
It leads to increased assaults on prisoners, heightens tension in prisons. It's the wrong thing to do. They've gone and closed down a whole heap of prisons and prison wings. What they need to do is upgrade those and open them so that prisoners actually don't have to spend 23 hours a day looking at someone they don't like. And, that's where the problems occur.
Meanwhile, Serco has been at the High Court in Wellington this week, challenging the Correction Department's Chief Inspector's final report on claims of violent attacks at Mount Eden Prison. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Amelia Langford.
Let's stay in Parliament. Is the government worried there isn't enough public support for changing the flag? A group of government MPs met this morning to try to drum up more public support for the flag change. The government says it wasn't a crisis meeting. If not, what was it? Political reporter Benedict Collins joins us now live from Parliament. Hi, Benedict. What is going on here?
Yeah, g'day. That's right. They're absolutely positive it's not a crisis meeting. Both John Key and Bill English are very sure on that. They've told me repeatedly. They say, hey, this is just a group of ministers and MPs who are keen to change the flag, and they're trying to get some more momentum for the change of the flag there. And they said it was Maggie Barry's idea, and that she called in the MPs for the meeting.
Okay, hold on a sec. They would say that, of course. I mean, they're hardly like to say, yes, Benedict, mea culpa, it's a crisis, we're bricking ourselves. They're not ever going to say that, are they? So, what was the meeting called for? Is it now government policy to get this flag through? And were all of caucus there or only some of them?
Well, definitely only some of them, and it's definitely not government policy to get the flag through. John Key was very clear, hey, this is up to each member in the National Party, they can vote whichever way they like. But he did also say, hey, look, when the government looks at this, they're looking at the polls, and before it was about 2/3 of the public were opposed to changing the flag, a third in favour, and they say that's narrowing. So they're quite, well, they're not confident, but they like the signs that it's getting closer. So these ministers and MPs who got together, I think they're going to try and look at what they can do just to try and ramp things up a little bit in favour of that blue and black Kyle Lockwood flag, the challenger.
Benedict, this is an unfair question because I suspect you don't have a clue, but any idea who wasn't invited and why they weren't? Is that list publicly available?
No, you're right there. I don't have a clue. No clue whatsoever.
Yeah, right. What are these MPs going to do then? Did they tell you what their strategy is?
No, we haven't heard that either, but I did have a chat with Andrew Little, who was very surprised, the Labour leader, to hear that this meeting had taken place, because he says, hey, look, the referendum is just a few weeks away. I think it starts on the 3rd of March and it's all over by the 24th. So they've left it very late, and Andrew Little said, hey, the train has left the station here. They've left it far too late. But what he thinks is happening here is he thinks a lot of national MPs and ministers are getting it in the neck from their own party faithful here, who are really opposed to changing the flag. So he thinks that could have been, behind the meeting today.
Benedict Collins from our gallery office. Thanks, Benedict. The time on Checkpoint is 22 minutes past 5. Coming up next, AFCO workers are set to return to work on Monday in Wairoa, but so much else is going on in the country's meatworks. We'll discuss it. And later in the programme, Hokitika residents brace themselves for more heavy rain, one particular street that really cops it. And we'll look at the bad weather that's going to hit much of the country over the next couple of days. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. Of course, text us 2101, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, or our Facebook and Twitter address is @checkpointrnz. Today, formal confirmation of the story we brought you last Friday. 170 Wairoa meat workers shut out of the AFCO plant in the town for 5 months will return to work on Monday. That follows an employment court decision that AFCO had unlawfully locked out members of the union at certain plants and that it had breached its good faith obligations when bargaining. But that victory comes at a time of uncertainty in the country's meatworks, and in Invercargill, as we discussed last night, 130 jobs are on the line after the new Chinese owners of Prime Range Meat suspended many of their staff 8 days ago. There have been other job losses at Lean Meats in Oamaru, also recently purchased by a Chinese company. In Rangiuru, another AFCO plant, workers and management are involved in a dispute over the Mondayisation of Waitangi Day. That is yet to be resolved. Joining us now is Darian Fenton, Director of Organising for the Meat Workers Union. Darian, welcome to the program. Can we start in Wairoa? 170 meat workers back from Monday. Is that the case?
That's true. That's absolutely what's happening. Workers have started getting calls yesterday. The union was notified of the recall list, which was a list of who's been invited back to work and on what shifts they're going to be on. And so we're proceeding with that. The workers are delighted. There will be some issues once they get back to work, but we'll sort them out then.
This is, of course, the employment court said that what was going on there was effectively unlawful or illegal. But even then, the workers, when I spoke to them last week, weren't that confident AFCO would allow them back. Why has this happened, do you think?
Well, the court was very careful to retain oversight of this dispute. So while they didn't issue a compliance order a week or 10 days ago, they did say that they would on Monday or Tuesday coming up if the company didn't comply with this. It's a very strong decision we got from the court. It's the second strong decision we've had from the employment court around AFCO issues. So I think, and also the other thing that AFCO they'd given the court an undertaking. If they were found to be wrong, they would immediately comply. So it would have looked pretty bad if they didn't.
Okay. You said that it was your second strong decision about AFCO issues. Can we compare your relationship with AFCO with your relationship with other employers? I think the biggest employer in this sector is Silver Fern Farms, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
How does the union get along with them?
Well, look, look, we get along fine with Silverfern Farms. I'll give you an example, John. You know, when there was the 50% investment from Chinese owners last year, they got our delegates together with Meat Workers Union officials and they gave us a briefing. That would never happen with AFCO. That's the kind of relationship we want to have. Doesn't mean we always agree, but what it does is say there's some respect for the people that actually do the work and they want to hear from them about their views and how they can help work together to make the company more productive.
There is a sense that it's pistols at dawn between the Meat Workers Union and AFCO, or AFCO and the Meat Workers Union, without wanting to be pejorative in terms of who's right and who's wrong. Is Rangiuru an example of that? Did you play hardball over the Mondayisation of Waitangi Day there?
No, what we sought from the company was, some sort of discussion about what the interpretation was and what their intentions were. Instead, what we got back with threats. And then yesterday, I spent the whole day going through misconduct meetings with workers over this issue. It could have been easily sorted out, and I repeated this again and again yesterday, just a phone call and a discussion, or a discussion with the delegates on site, rather than the kind of approach that's been taken. As it happens now, we're going to the Employment Authority to get the whole thing sorted out, get an interpretation, and I'm not expecting that AFCO will take any dismissal or disciplinary procedures against those workers in the meantime.
But at the moment, that's not resolved, that situation.
No, it's not. So they were still claiming yesterday it was misconduct because the workers didn't turn up. And as I say, we had meetings of around 30 workers, 10-minute meetings, misconduct meetings where the company wanted to ask questions. Our response was the same. The workers had a genuine belief that under the Holidays Act and the employment agreement, they were entitled to have the Monday off.
Okay, very quickly, because we're running out of time. What's the situation with job losses in the South Island? Are you concerned about this?
Well, the prime rate meats thing is very, very concerning because we know so little about it. Such a mystery about what's
130 jobs on the line in Invercargill, yeah.
Yeah, not good in Invercargill and Townline Invercargill where jobs are precious. Lean meats, well, what's happened there's been an unusual layoff of the beef production line, 14 weeks. It's very, very unusual in that area. Again, we don't know an awful lot about what's going on. We are worried about some of the comments that we've seen from the company about what they might do in the future. The union's going to be monitoring that and supporting the workers all the way through this.
Darian Fenton, Director of Organising for the Meat Workers Union, thank you for joining us. 5:28. Katrina is standing by with the latest news headlines, but the Tertiary Education Commission says it cannot protect staff who blow the whistle on rorts at tertiary institutions. The Commission also revealed at its annual review by Parliament's Education and Science Select Committee that it's preparing to write off nearly $9 million owned by institutions that delivered less teaching than they were paid for. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen filed this report.
Funding rorts by tertiary institutions dominated the Tertiary Education Commission's appearance, but its chief executive, Tim Fowler, assured MPs the problem is not widespread. He said the Commission has ordered 6 institutions to repay $28 million, and that's not much given the size of the sector.
That $28 million is still less than 1% of the total amount of funding that we provide. So that's the context. Let me say we're absolutely not going to stand for anyone messing around with the system. And that is why we pursue these institutions as far as is appropriate.
Tim Fowler later said there was little chance of getting $9 million of that money back from private training providers, Manaakitanga Aotearoa Charitable Trust and Agribusiness Training, both of whom have delivered less teaching than they were paid to do. But he said the Commission was ramping up its efforts to prevent further abuse of the funding system.
We are increasing the number of audits we do per annum from around 30 to 40, and we'll have that ramped up to about 70 by at least mid-year, maybe towards the second half of the year. As I said, we've already started utilising pattern recognition software. We have fortnightly risk assessment meetings with our colleagues at NZQA.
The Commission's chairperson, John Spencer, said despite the extra effort, the Commission cannot guarantee there'll be no further problems.
If you really want to get into this, if you wanted us to make sure, as the Madam just said, that nothing is going to happen again, I'll employ 600 auditors, if you like. Everyone's got to be in every class, over 4,000 providers, whatever the heck it is. I mean, it's just silly. Sorry, with respect.
The Labour Party MP, David Cunliffe, has been harrying the Commission over its scrutiny of the sector for months. At today's hearing, he made its staff eat humble pie for problems with their annual accounts and asked John Spencer if the Commission can protect whistleblowers who alert it to potential fraud.
No, well, see, Mr. Culliford, no. The trouble is, we're not that person's employer, shall I say. If we were, that's a different issue. So if someone coming to us making a comment like that, we're not their employer. We can't give them we can give them protection in terms of what's available under the legislation, but we couldn't say to their employer, "No, don't sue them." We can't do that. We don't have that ability.
David Cunliffe later told RNZ News that's not good enough and the Commission must do more.
I would like to see them make a public commitment that if a whistleblower came forward to them that they would offer to treat them in confidence. Secondly, I'd like to see a directive from them to the institutions that retribution against whistleblowers where the complaint is found to be valid is inappropriate, and that's to standover tactics.
David Cunliffe says a whistleblower who alerted the Commission to proven problems at a tertiary institute is now being sued for bringing it into disrepute. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
29 minutes to 6. Here is Katrina with the RNZ News headlines.
Hundreds of people in central Auckland, including Sky City Casino visitors, have been exposed to measles after a man refused to be quarantined. A medical officer of health, Dr. Richard Hoskins, told Checkpoint anyone who is not immune to measles and was exposed to the man also needs to be quarantined. The man was infected by a passenger he was seated near on a flight from China that arrived in Auckland on January the 30th. He visited Sky City Casino between 9:45 p.m. and midnight on Friday the 9th and Sugar Tree Apartments between February the 9th and 13th. They have no idea the man would not obey the quarantine instructions. The Department of Corrections Chief Executive has taken personal responsibility for problems at former Serco-run Mount Eden Prison over fight clubs and allegations of violent attacks. Appearing before the Law and Order Select Committee today, Ray Smith told MPs things could have been handled better, but the prison is now performing well. An Auckland Airport employee has been sacked and the police called in after nearly $2 million of unexplained transactions were found. The airport company says it's begun civil action against the former employee and called in auditors to carry out a forensic investigation. 2 teachers are facing a disciplinary hearing over their relationship with a 13-year-old student who was later found dead. The teachers are accused of serious misconduct in that they formed an inappropriate relationship with the student. A group of government MPs met this morning to try to drum up more public support to change the flag, but the government's adamant it wasn't a crisis meeting and says it was not panicking about the result of next month's referendum. Polls suggest the public remains largely opposed to changing the flag. That's the headlines. I'll have more news, sport and weather at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's turn to business now with Nona Peltier, Fletcher Building. Big half-year profit, Nona?
Yeah, they had a big half-year profit. It was in line with expectations, up 51%, pretty darn good.
Up 51% year on year?
Yeah. On the year earlier. So they their company's first half net profit was exactly what the market was hoping for at the top end, so $172 million. That's compared with $114 million the year earlier.
Okay. What did the share price do?
Well, it actually went up and down, as did another company, A2 Milk, but that was even more spectacular.
I'm fascinated by A2 Milk, but I want to come back to the Fletcher share price. You said it was in line with expectations. In other words, the market had already factored this profit announcement into the share price.
Right, so the share price went up, tick, 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 but then I guess there was some profit taking, so that it went down again.
Okay.
But nothing like we saw on the A2 Milk, which is a specialist dairy producer. So they make this special milk. It's got a special X factor, which the Chinese are prepared to pay for.
Right.
And anyway, so their net profit, believe it or not, for the first 6 months went to $10.1 million, compared with $125,000 the year earlier.
Okay, so in cash terms, not a huge profit. In percentage terms, that is a substantial. That's huge. Out of the park.
So
I'm just looking at their website now.
Yeah, so their share price went really crazy. It went up like immediately when it opened this morning, up 26%.
Yeah.
And the market was just like crazy for this company. Bought it up large, but then it ended up just up about, I think 3.5%. So it came back down. I'm assuming there's a lot of profit taking in there today as well.
We must talk to them and find out about their milk, because it's certainly, their website is not backwards and coming forwards about its they're not shy. They're not shy about promoting themselves.
It would take more than just our little chat here to go into the
to delve into
the importance of their milk. But I tell you what, so it just goes to show that our dairy, some of our dairy is really quite in demand, and the Chinese will buy dairy if it's the right kind. So there you go. So even though our GDT prices, that's the global dairy trade prices, were down again, hey, it's not all bad.
So unless you're one of those farmers who converted at the top of the market, right, and are mortgaged up to the eyeballs, we're expecting to service it at a whole lot more. You know, I mean, this is, we're starting to hear these stories now. It's getting tough for some of these people.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, again, you know, that's putting more pressure on the Reserve Bank on interest rates.
Yeah.
You know, so it's a big cycle. And hey, so some news, though, I have to tell you, the Russians and the Saudis are talking about oil.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what did that do to prices?
Well, it kind of caused a bit of volatility, but as you'd expect, they're prepared to hold tight on supply as long as everyone else agrees. So watch this space.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
And so,
it'll be interesting to see what Iran does, right?
Well, you know, everybody, it's anyone's guess. But one thing the market will be looking at overnight is the U.S. Federal Reserve minutes of their last meeting are going to be released. So the market will be watching those, reading them very carefully to see what clues there might be on what the U.S. Might do on interest rates. Meanwhile, our market ended up just 10 points, so hardly changed at all after quite a lot of volatility. And the dollar's trading at 65.5.
Reporter Laura Bootham, who was at the court-martial. Thanks very much indeed, Laura. 19.5 to 6. The Social Development Minister, Anne Tolley, says it's insulting to accuse Child, Youth and Family of massaging child abuse statistics to achieve targets she has set. In its annual State of the Nation report, the Salvation Army claims some government departments are willfully ignorant of the effects of their policies and are doing the bidding of their ministers. Paloma Magoni reports.
The Salvation Army says government targets to reduce physical abuse against children are sometimes disguising other less favourable statistics. Its policy analyst, Alan Johnson, says one example is the number of child abuse cases, which SIF says has dropped from 21,000 to 60,500 since 2010.
But if you actually have a look at what's happened, is that Child, Youth and Family have chosen not to follow up as many cases of emotional abuse or reported neglect, and in turn don't follow up as many of the 150,000 reported suspected cases of abuse and neglect from the public.
The Salvation Army also says SIF figures show a decline in the number of assaults on children, while police statistics show the reverse. But the chief social worker for SIF, Paul Nixon, says the discrepancies are because police collect data differently.
If an adolescent has attacked another adolescent, that wouldn't necessarily be a child protection investigation. We're primarily concerned about children's living environments and who's looking after them and the quality and the safety of their care.
A former SIF social worker, Nicola Atwell, who was on the panel that reviewed caseloads, says the discrepancies still warrant a closer look.
There are some very real difficulties when you set those kinds of targets, and I think they can obscure rather than assist the situation in terms of increasing the effectiveness of our response.
The Children's Commissioner, Russell Wills, says it's not even necessarily a good idea for SIF to intervene in some abuse cases at first.
The Chief Social Worker's report, in fact, found is that Child, Youth and Family engaging with those families can, in fact, do harm because it can delay the time between identifying the child at risk and effecting change. So what we want is to identify those families and get them as quickly as possible into a service that is good at engaging with families with those kinds of complex issues.
The Social Development Minister, Anne Tolley, says the government does set bold targets, but it thoroughly evaluates its policy outcomes.
Nobody who works in child, youth and family, one of the most difficult jobs out there in government, turns up at work every day to cook the books, to make a minister look good. They're there to make sure that children are kept safe, and it's an insult to those people.
Mrs. Tolley says the government wants to make sure its policies are making a difference. For Checkpoint, Paloma Magoni.
Brace yourselves in many parts of the country for some pretty bad weather over the next couple of days. We're going to discuss this with meteorologist Georgina Griffiths a bit later in the program. But first, there's already been flooding in Hokitika on the South Island's west coast, of course, but not in all of Hokitika. It's one particular street that has been hardest hit once again. This is Rolleston Street, where flooding has been a recurring issue to the extent that it's really starting to wind residents up. Some were forced to move after flooding last June, deemed their houses or made their homes uninhabitable, including this resident who didn't want to be named.
It is a street that floods a lot. Up until we had our big flood June last year, every time it rained, our street would be what we would call bank to bank. So you couldn't drive down the street without being at least half a tyre depth of water. It used to come up to the start of the concrete in our driveway, and it would sit there and then go down.
After this?
The flood we had in June, it came up and kept coming until it was right through our house. And then this flood that we've had today, or last night it flooded, and this morning is the first time it's happened since June.
Okay, so when it happened last June, it was up to what, 400 mils up in your house, was it?
400 mil through our house. So from the drain to the top of the water level was 1.2 metres.
Holy moly. Have you spoken to the council about this, about why your street is worse than any other street in town?
There's no problem on our street. Yes, it floods, but there's no problem.
Is that what they say?
That's what they say. There is no problem on our street. Yes, they know it floods, but there's no problem.
So a street that repeatedly floods doesn't have a problem?
No.
And what do you think about that?
It's frustrating because you ask them, what do we need to do to get our street classed as having a problem so that we can get something done with our stormwater system, and they won't tell us what we need to do to get our street
sorted.
I don't know, classified as has a problem. I mean, it's like an aftershock for an earthquake. Every time it rains, we start sweating because half the contents of our house is still in our garage. So if our garage floods again, we then lose another half of our house.
Joining us, we're just welcoming actually a Met Service expert who's going to talk about weather in a couple of minutes. But joining us now from the Western District Council is Group Assets Manager Vivek Goel. Vivek, welcome to the program. Rolleston Street, why does it flood all the time?
Hi, John. Look, I'd just like to make a comment. The council is fully aware of the issues. The Rolleston Street catchment is a naturally low-lying area. We are fully aware of the issues. As a matter of fact, after the June event, the council promised the residents to commission a solutions report. We know what the solutions are. We know what tentative costs are. This report was presented to the council in November, and the council made a resolution that they would like to include the proposed projects in the upcoming annual plan for consultation.
Is that going to happen?
Well, we know what the solution is.
So you know what the solution is, and you've got a resolution, and there's consultation. But unless you can make sandbags out of that stuff, it isn't going to stop Rolleston Street from flooding, is it?
No, it's not stopping. I mean, we had a flooding issue this morning, and we are not going away from that. We are not shying away. Yes, there is a problem, and as the council decided, we want the community to decide, because it's not only Rolleston Street. We have to look at the catchment as a whole.
Okay, so Vivek, sorry. So there's been some very well-meaning words, and that's how everything begins. But meaningfully, materially, what is going to be done to stop Rolleston Street from flooding every time there's bad rain?
Look, at this stage, I can tell you that our systems are not capable of handling the storm events which are more than 1 in 2 years. So it means that the exceptional rain events which are happening, the street gets flooded. And at this stage, all I can comment is that we know the solution, and the council, it's being consulted upon. Unfortunately, that's the best we can do. However,
it's not, Vivek, it's tremendous to hear your sincerity, and I absolutely know you want to do something, but it's meaningless if you live on Rolleston Street. That stuff is meaningless.
Look, as I said, we know how much it's going to cost. If we get the indication from the residents if they want to act reactively on this one, the estimated cost just for Rolleston Street identified in advance is close to $1 million. It's about $850,000. As a whole, the project is estimated to cost us about $3.4 million. And that is something which we cannot make the decision straight away. The council has got a process to follow. They will be consulting upon these projects in the upcoming annual plan, which is going to be adopted at this stage in March for consultation.
OK, we'll give you a call back after March and see how it went. Thanks, Vivek. Vivek Goel, who is the Group Assets Manager for the Western District Council, live on the phone, talking about a particularly flood-prone street in Hokitika. Heavy rain and thunderstorms are expected throughout much of the country overnight tonight. Joining us now in the studio is Georgina Griffiths from Met Service. Georgina, welcome.
Welcome.
And you had a hell of a time getting here because of the Auckland traffic light.
I did, but late.
Yeah, well, no, it's all right. Better late than never. But also, the Auckland traffic is bad because the weather's bad. I haven't been outside for a while, but what's happening in the country?
Oh, look, I mean, the North Island hasn't seen the worst of it yet. That's tomorrow and into Friday morning. Several bands of these very heavy rainfall rates across the country. I mean, look how warm it's been. We've got warm, juicy northerlies, and we're starting to squeeze that moisture out now. Look at the mess it made in Hokitika. And actually, talking about Hokitika, 210 millimetres in the last 18 hours. That's a huge number of rain. It's actually very close to breaking that record they saw last June. So it is an exceptional event for the West Coast.
That is a lot of rain.
Nelson's had good rain. Southland got some good stuff. Eastern areas of the South Island haven't had much, aren't expected to get too much, which is a shame. But as I mentioned, North Island hasn't even started yet, OK? Heavy rainfall tomorrow and into the early hours of Friday. Several bands, so it's stop and start kind of stuff, with a thunderstorm watch until overnight period for Northwest South Island, and potential for some downpours for the North Island too. Exactly where and exactly when, keep up with the forecast because it's a pretty dynamic situation.
OK, when you say it's dynamic, this front's just moving around.
Oh, there's several of them,
right,
and they've all got juice. They're all very moist, very warm, and when you squeeze it out, it makes a mess.
OK, so too early to project or predict where is going to be wettest in the North Island?
No, we have warnings where we think it will be wettest.
OK, good. Can you hit me with
Central
those?
North Island,
okay.
Taranaki, and we have watches on the periphery, places like south of Auckland, so Waikato, Waitomo, Taumarunui, into Eastern Bay of Plenty, further around sort of Taupo, into Waitomo and places around Taumarunui. So it's that central area and expanding out from that. I mean, Auckland's going to get a wet day tomorrow, potential risk for downpours over central Auckland and south of there. So Waikato's a good risk. Tauranga, we have to see about Tauranga. But, you know, the main places where people live are going to get very wet tomorrow and into the early hours of Friday.
And let's go back to the poor old West Coast that, as you said, has had 210 millimetres.
Yeah.
Wow, are they going to get more?
Yes, so it's, again, stop and start, and we've got a couple more hours left in this one. Unfortunately, they have a good pause overnight and then back into it by noon tomorrow. More rain on the west coast, probably not Hokitika, it'll be not north of there, it'll be south again. And another burst coming up on Friday and Saturday. So we've got quite an extended wet period for the country coming up. Yeah, really interesting and quite a special event with both islands going off.
OK. I just want to say, you have driven through Auckland traffic, which is extreme. It's horrendous, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you knew
it hasn't even, it's only light stuff, very patchy out there. The worst for us tomorrow night.
For the rest of the country doesn't give a damn about Auckland traffic.
No.
But those of us who get stuck in it, especially when you have somewhere to be, like a radio interview, know how stressful it is.
Yeah.
You have turned up and delivered a tour de force of weather forecasting.
OK, so the final word would be tomorrow night's rush hour for Auckland. Much worse.
Right.
Pretty evil.
So wherever you're going, plan to be late.
Yeah, or just find alternatives.
OK.
Yeah.
What an excellent weather forecaster you are. Thank you, Georgina Griffiths from the Met Service. You're welcome
Thanks, John.
anytime you like in the studio. OK, it is coming up to 8 minutes to 6. Georgina just went out the door. I heard someone saying, "Oh my God." Yes. It's not much fun getting stuck in Auckland traffic. Let's turn to sport now, and on the menu tonight, rugby league, rugby union and football. Matt Chatterton begins with a big announcement by the Warriors today.
Yes, Simon Mannering is standing down as captain. He's been captain since 2010, so he's taken them to a NRL Grand Final, but unfortunately they didn't win. He's now stepping down. He wants to mainly focus on his contribution to the team as a player. And Andrew McFadden actually said himself that he wasn't expecting this. They wanted to keep the same captain, but instead he's had to give the reins to Ryan Hoffman, who joined the Warriors just last season from the Melbourne Storm. He played something like 200 games for the Melbourne Storm, so he's been around a long time, a bit of a veteran in the NRL.
Simon Mannering, about 136 games as skipper, which is extraordinary. He'll be missed, won't he? Although there is a sense that the team under him was happy and they like him a great deal, but perhaps the results weren't all they had hoped for.
He was very much a team player. You know, everyone would always say that he put in some of the best work rate in the Warriors side, and I think that's why he wants to sort of step aside a little bit too, so he can focus on being such a team player. And obviously he'll still have all those leadership attributes when, you know, they need that help. He'll be there for them.
All Blacks are going to the US again?
Yeah, so they're going back to Chicago. The Māori All Blacks are going as well. They'll be playing the USA Eagles. They'll be the ones that actually play the US, and the All Blacks are playing Ireland at Soldier Field, where they played famously back in 2014 against the Eagles. So it's promising to be, I think it's called the Rugby Weekend or something over there. So
the Māori All Blacks and the All Blacks playing on consecutive nights?
They're playing on the Friday and the Saturday, November 4th and 5th.
And the Māori are playing the Eagles,
yes,
which is the US national team.
Yep, at the Toyota Field, I believe. It's got about 30,000 seats, so pretty good sized stadium.
And the All Blacks are playing Ireland?
Yes, at Soldier Field, where they got about 60,000 in 2014. So
which will be a great game, that All Blacks Ireland game.
I mean, it's all about, you know, expanding that brand in America, because America isn't very, rugby, isn't very popular in America, but that's really what, you know, taking the All Blacks there. The Wallabies went last year as well and played the US, and I think it was in the same venues. So, you know, they are really trying to grow that rugby brand and the All Blacks brand over there.
The people have been saying for a long time we're trying to grow rugby in America, and it hasn't grown. There is a sense, I have this visceral sense now that it's starting to happen. First of all, the Sevens team is winning some games and some tournaments. But more than that, it seems to have taken off from merely the college circuit.
Yeah, and I mean also when you mentioned there the Sevens, and the American media made a massive deal out of when the All Blacks Sevens got beaten by the USA Sevens. Like, we normally call them the New Zealand Sevens, but because they had that All Black title in them, and the Americans that did know a little bit about rugby, they knew the All Blacks were the team to beat. They made this massive deal thinking, oh my word, we've beaten the All Blacks. But you're right, it comes out of the college as well, but the Sevens presence is huge. And also, I suppose, you know, their team, they performed at the recent World Cup last year. Probably, in fact, or did they? Maybe not. But they've had a few games, international games of recognition, and they are trying really desperately.
Really hard. And also, lest we forget, the All Blacks sponsor AIG, head offices in New York, which is on the other side of the states. But I bet they're all going to have all of their big corporate clients going to have a big weekend across here. Can we talk about the Phoenix?
Yes.
Actually, this isn't the Phoenix fault. It's New Zealand football have once again stolen defeat from the jaws of victory. Is it unfair to describe these people as woefully inept?
Well, I mean, you look at some of the track record with what's happened in the last 18 months, and obviously last year we had the Olympic qualifier that we were disqualified out of because one of our players was ineligible, and New Zealand football deemed that he was, but it turned out he in fact wasn't. Now he is, but back then he wasn't. And then we've also had this Phoenix issue. So
the Phoenix tried to get a loan player?
Yeah, so they tried to get Alex Jones, English striker from Birmingham City. There's very strict rules around the FIFA windows and sort of the time limit to transfer these players from different clubs. Pretty much what happened was the guy that was in charge of doing it at New Zealand Football didn't get in on time and didn't have an internet connection to get the transfer window completed with the application form. They tried sending it in. FIFA declined it because everyone knows what the requirements are when it comes to a FIFA transfer window like that. And so they said no. So now Alex Jones is going to have to jump back on a plane and head back to the UK.
Sports reporter Matt Chatterton. We put in a bid to interview the CEO of New Zealand Football, Andy Martin, who declined the opportunity to appear on Checkpoint. Perhaps he missed the transfer window. It's 3 minutes to 6. The band Eagles of Death Metal have returned to Paris 3 months after the Friday night attack by Islamic State militants that saw 90 people at their concert murdered and 40 others murdered in downtown Paris. Here's Mana Rabi from Reuters on the return of the band, whose concert was at the centre of that terrible night.
Their name is Back in Lights. The Eagles of Death Metal have returned to Paris for their first headline gig here since November's massacre by Islamic State militants at the Bataclan Concert Hall. For frontman Jesse Hughes, it'll be an emotional return.
I really don't know how I feel. It's just, I am glad to be back. There's just been such an outpouring of support for us and love for us. It's overwhelming.
90 people were killed during their show on November 13, part of a series of attacks that night in the French capital that left 130 people dead. In December, the band returned to the site of the massacre, which had become a sort of shrine to Paris's resolve to recover.
They were robbed of their stage 3 weeks ago, and we would like to offer them ours tonight.
They've also been back to Paris to play a tribute concert with U2. But this time around, Hughes says the band is ready to finish what they started.
I can't let the bad guys win, and I have to be with my friends again. And we have to finish this, not for anyone else, more just for us.
Survivors of the attack have been given free tickets to the concert. Psychologists will be on hand, along with tight security, to help fans cope with their own emotional return.
That report from Reuters. Coming up to 6 o'clock, time for some feedback. Measles. Susie, I must say it's most unusual for anyone to go into Sky City and come out with more than they took in. Pauline, I realise I'm dating myself by my attitude. Well, let's wait and see, Pauline, but I can't help smiling at the fuss that is made over measles these days. Yes, you may be, I wonder. Anyone would think we were talking about typhoid. When I was a child, we all had it. It wasn't particularly pleasant, but it was considered a normal part of life, and no one I knew suffered any permanent damage from it. That's Pauline. On the flag, Annie says if Maggie Barry were doing the job she's supposed to, she would have secured that apparently spare $23 million for DOC instead of supporting a flag referendum that no one wanted. And Martin said it's appalling the government think they can do something to influence the flag. That should be left alone for people to vote how they want. Excellently cantankerous feedback coming in this evening. It's the weather, I think. It's winding people up. 27 seconds until the news at 6 o'clock. If you do have feedback, and we love it, you can text it into 2101. You can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, and you can get in touch with us on Facebook and Twitter. The address is Checkpoint RNZ. I'm now going to pause so we can enjoy the glory of the pips. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Everyone, welcome. Lovely to have you with us. Coming up in the next half hour, 2 teachers have been accused of misconduct over their relationship with a teenage principal. We'll hear from our reporter who was at the hearing. Teenage pupil. Anger in Taranaki is the man in charge of the iwi when it lost millions, seeks re-election to its trust, and Vanuatu's runway will finally get a repair job, which is really good news for that country that's had such a tough 12 months. But first, here's the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Health officials in Auckland say there's a very good chance others have been infected with measles after a traveller refused to go into quarantine. People who are not immune and who were in the Sky City casino from 9:45 p.m. to midnight on February the 9th are being told they're at risk. The same is true for people who were in the lifts and common areas of the nearby Sugar Tree apartments from the 9th to the 13th. An Auckland Medical Officer of Health, Richard Hoskins, says measles are very infectious. He told Checkpoint one person on average infects up to 18 others if they have no immunity.
People who've been in those places need to look out and find out whether they're immune themselves or not. And then if they're not immune, they need to be in quarantine as of now, even if they're not symptomatic.
Richard Hoskins says it's not known exactly how many people the person came into contact with. An Auckland airport employee has been sacked and the police called in after nearly $2 million of unexplained transactions were found. The airport company says it has begun civil action against the former employee and called in auditors EY to carry out a forensic investigation. Auckland Airport describes the sacked worker as a non-executive employee. It says to date the auditors have uncovered $1.84 million of unexplained transactions. In a statement to the stock exchange, the listed company's chief financial officer, Phil Neutzer, says while it's a serious matter, the sum of money does not affect its financial statements or reported results. The Finance Minister says the government is not manipulating statistics to achieve its targets to improve the well-being of children. The Salvation Army today released its annual State of the Nation report, which accuses some departments of being so focused on meeting targets they've become willfully ignorant of the effect of policy. The Minister, Bill English, says the organisation has exaggerated its points.
What I think that report shows is how much more mature the discussion actually is. In the past, government didn't know much about what it was trying to do. It wasn't clear with the public. Now we are very clear about it, and that gives the Salvation Army the opportunity to say, well, you're doing a good job here, but we don't like what you're doing there. That's just the feedback we want.
Bill English says of the Salvation Army's 22 indicators, 9 show good progress, 8 have not changed, 3 have slipped back, and there's insufficient evidence in 2 areas. 2 teachers are facing a disciplinary hearing over their relationship with a 13-year-old student who was later found dead. The couple are accused of serious misconduct in that they formed an inappropriate relationship with the student. This included text messages and allowing the student to stay overnight while her parents believed she was staying with friends. They're also alleged to have counselled the student without adequate training or experience. The case is being heard before the disciplinary tribunal of the Teachers' Council. There's been no suggestion of any sexual connection, but a lot of affection, including cuddling and holding hands. The male teacher was also accused of not informing the authorities when he became aware of the student cutting herself and being at risk of self-harm. The student subsequently received psychiatric treatment before her death. A soldier will be dismissed from the army after supplying the psychoactive drug N-bomb to a group of fellow soldiers during a night out in Palmerston North. At a court-martial at Linton Army Camp today, Judge Anne Gaskell ordered Private Luke Brame to be kept in a detention centre for 90 days. Laura Bootham reports from his court-martial.
The judge ordered the 22-year-old apprentice mechanic be dismissed from the service. Brame admitted charges of supplying and offering to supply a psychoactive substance and doing an act likely to prejudice service discipline last October. The court heard the men started hallucinating and behaving violently and had to be restrained to stop them self-harming. 2 soldiers hit their heads against cell walls until they bled. Judge Gaskell said Brame was the author of his own misfortune. She said his actions had led to 5 other soldiers being discharged before Christmas. At Linton Army Camp, Laura Bootham.
A group of MPs met this morning to try to drum up more public support to change the flag. But the government's adamant it wasn't a crisis meeting and says it's not panicking about the result of next month's referendum. Recent polls have suggested the public remains largely opposed to changing the flag, although the government spent $26 million on 2 referendums. The Prime Minister, John Campbell, says it was simply a meeting of politicians who support change. In sport, the Warriors coach Andrew McFadden says he wanted Simon Mannering to continue to captain the National Rugby League team. The 29-year-old has stood down from the Warriors captaincy after 6 seasons in charge and been replaced by the 32-year-old Australian Ryan Hoffman. Mannering says the responsibility of being captain was detracting from his enjoyment of playing. McFadden says his preference was for Mannering to keep the job, but after leading the team a record 136 times, he's earned the right to step down. The New Zealand pace bowler Doug Bracewell has been ruled out of the second cricket test against Australia due to a shoulder injury. He'll be replaced by either Neil Wagner or Matt Henry, who didn't play in New Zealand's defeat in the first test at the Basin Reserve. The second test at Christchurch's Hagley Oval starts on Saturday. The All Black Jerome Kaino says New Zealand's match with Ireland in America this November is good for the game of rugby. The All Blacks return to Soldier Field in Chicago on November the 5th, a day after the Māori All Blacks play the United States at the same ground. Kaino says rugby fans in America will enjoy hosting a match between Tier 1 nations.
It's good for the game, getting supporters to travel to a neutral country and support both teams. So try and get some form, hopefully be a part of it.
Jerome Kaino's Blues will be without 7 stars Akira Ioane for Friday's pre-season match, with the Chiefs due to a hamstring strain. That's the news.
1,000 missing cases.
Difficult to reconcile the fact that the police have come across 1,000 more cases of physical abuse of children than SIFS wants to accept.
5 months of waiting.
They still haven't made any progress on putting more emergency housing in place.
Millions in belt tightening.
We put more money into health, but DHBs have always had to find savings.
Breaking down the numbers. Susie Ferguson and Guy Espiner, Morning Report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, as the Edinburgh tattoo bursts into life in the capital, we speak to the narrator, former Scottish MP, broadcaster and author Alistair Hutton. And after 11, our tech expert asks, has Twitter peaked? Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow now. The northern half of the North Island, that's from Taranaki and Taupo northwards, including Bay of Plenty. Periods of rain, some heavy falls from tonight and isolated thunderstorms tomorrow. Rain clearing in Taranaki tomorrow morning. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, rain about the ranges, a few falls spreading elsewhere. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington also wide at upper. Occasional rain easing to a few showers and increasing fine spells tomorrow. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, periods of heavy thundery rain with localised torrential falls. Marlborough and Canterbury, rain with heavy falls and thunderstorms near the western ranges and Marlborough Sounds. Scattered falls elsewhere, but long fine spells tomorrow. Otago and Southland, periods of rain with heavy thundery falls today, especially about central Otago. Further rain near the western ranges tomorrow, but long fine spells elsewhere. The Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It's coming up to 9 minutes past 6.
Just before you go, Katrina, Beth in an email congratulating you on the magnificence of your composure an hour ago when your microphone wasn't on.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, so yeah, I'm with Beth on that. Wonderful. Composure. Well, being on the radio is one thing, but now you're on the damn camera as well.
It's too embarrassing.
No,
really.
well, it's not embarrassing.
And now everybody knows that I've got a backpack at the back here, and I have to do that and turn the buttons on.
Well, yeah, that's right.
Oh well.
Radio secrets.
Yeah.
That's what happens if you watch. You get radio secrets revealed.
Exactly. Everybody should be watching.
That's right. Tune into the streaming. Or you just get Katrina being magnificent and composed, as Beth put it, on the wireless. Let's go to Eric Frickberg. 2 teachers are facing a disciplinary hearing over their relationship with a 13-year-old student. This is a terrible case who was later found dead. The 2 are accused of serious misconduct and they formed an inappropriate relationship with the student. Reporter Eric Frickberg has been at the disciplinary tribunal of the Teachers' Council and is on the phone now. Eric, what can you tell us about this?
Well, John, a lot of the facts here are suppressed. We do know that one of the respondents is a 42-year-old male teacher who taught at an intermediate school. The other was his 33-year-old fiancée. Now, they were at intermediate schools, were not allowed to name the schools or the respondents, and even the geography is suppressed. However, some of the allegations that were made against them are clear. One is that their target was a 13-year-old girl with whom they engaged in prolific texting and prolific emails. Moreover, the 13-year-old girl would sometimes stay at the house with the male teacher. The female teacher was also there, and she thought, she told her parents that she was with friends, and her mother later gave evidence that they believed that the teacher also knew that that was the reason she'd given to her parents. Now, he also gave her gifts and established quite a strong emotional attachment to them. Now, it's important to point out that there was no suggestion of any sex here, and there isn't any criminal hearing pending, but there were moments of intimacy, there were cases of hand-holding. He lay on the bed with her while she was in hospital and engaged in cuddling. And furthermore, he didn't talk about any self-harm or cutting of herself that she took part in, and that also formed part of the inappropriate relationship allegation against this male teacher.
Okay, gosh, this is terrible. Subsequent to this, did the student receive psychiatric treatment, Eric?
Certainly did receive treatment at a hospital, then was sent to another hospital in one of the main centres and was given detailed treatment there. There was a problem with depression. After that, the teacher returned to her hometown, and it was after that that she died. Now, this happened after she ran away, and there was intervention by a psychiatrist. Now, he said that counselling this child was very difficult. He said the child was very reluctant to involve her parents in this case. In fact, he said that few teenagers had ever been as adamant as she was to keep her parents out of any treatment of her. Now, he went on to say that she was also very loyal to the male defendant, and she expressed worries many times that he might get into trouble on her behalf, and she wanted to protect him from that.
Okay, so this is continuing this disciplinary hearing?
Yes, it is. They've gone for another 2 days. There was other evidence today from the mother of the 13-year-old girl. Now, she said that her daughter had been very happy, was well-adjusted, showed leadership potential, and got on very well with friends, and was very good at sport. But after coming into contact with these 2 teachers, she became withdrawn and estranged from her parents and developed serious behavioural characteristics that got them very worried. But they never knew how serious it was. was, and they said it came as a complete shock when they discovered the extent of this girl's relationship with the teachers.
Reporter Eric Frickberg, who has been at the Disciplinary Tribunal of the Teachers' Council. Thank you, Eric. 12 minutes past 6. A report suggesting that Auckland's port could move to the Muriwai, Mahurangi or Kaipara harbours has left many scratching their heads. The port's future study has just released its long list of port locations that could work from what the study calls a purely technical perspective. And as our reporter Kate Newton discovered, the group's suggestions are already creating opposition.
The port's future study was set up last year by Auckland's Mayor Lem Brown after widespread outcry over Ports of Auckland's proposal to expand further into Waitemata Harbour. The study group's chairman, Rick Boven, says today's long list is one part of the group's work, which will also canvass options for keeping the port where it is.
The list that's been developed at the moment is of areas which are theoretically feasible from a technical perspective, which means that they're areas that have the right sort of water depth, some adjacent land capacity, some adjacency to distance routes.
Mr Boven says the next step is to analyse each area in more detail, and some might immediately be scratched for environmental, social or other concerns.
We're simply starting with their sort of theoretical, technical feasibility to start with, so that we can ensure that later on in the process we don't have people coming in and saying, but you didn't consider this location, you didn't consider that location. We're just trying to be comprehensive. There are studies that have been done in the past. There are some locations that were identified in the past. We're including those as well. And it's really just to make sure that we do a thorough job.
Muriwai resident and Rodney local board member Phelan Perry says he was bemused to find the long, isolated stretch of black sand beach was one of the areas identified by the group.
Somebody's obviously done a desktop exercise and somebody sits there looking at Google Maps and goes, looks like we might be able to put a port in there, but I just can't fathom the feasibility of it. I mean, I see Kaipara was marked on there, and I could sort of understand why you might put something in at Kaipara. But even in Kaipara and the Manukau Harbour, the coming across the heads is a real problem.
Mr Perry says the long list seems like a waste of time.
You do have to question it, because I thought this was a serious issue, and then when I saw the map at the end of the email, I was like, really, are you that serious? Because I have to say, I thought the majority of those things could have just been excluded before you even got to that point.
Auckland councillor Mike Lee goes one further.
This report just confirms my scepticism about the whole exercise. It seems to me one of those batty local government efforts. I can't see much sense in the whole thing.
Mr Lee says moving the port would cost billions of dollars, even if it could get over resource consent hurdles.
There's no better place for the port than the present location. However, there are limitations on how big the port will grow. And I think public expectations, which are reasonable, is that the port should be contained within its present footprint. What the focus should be on is not expansion or even relocating, but becoming more efficient.
Ports of Auckland, whose chief executive Tony Gibson is part of the study group, declined to comment on the long list. The port study group is now seeking feedback, and the completed study is due by the end of June. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Kate Newton.
The man at the helm of a Taranaki iwi when it lost much of its treaty settlement money is now seeking election as a trustee for the tribe. He's former National Party candidate Greg White, who was chief executive of the iwi when it lost millions of dollars in bad investments. That his name is now on voting papers for Ngāti Tama board elections next week has caused real anger. Māori Issues correspondent Mihi Narangi Forbes reports.
Archdeacon Tiki Tūterangi Raumati says at 79 he's too old to get involved in iwi politics, but that doesn't stop him watching closely from the sideline. The loss of much of the tribe's treaty money is still raw for Mr Raumati, and when former CEO Greg White's name comes up, he's quick to respond.
Straight off the top of my hat, very bad. He shouldn't stand again. I mean, goodness gracious me. I don't know what these people are thinking.
Greg White negotiated the iwi's $14.5 million settlement 15 years ago. But since then, the balance sheet has shrunk dramatically. According to its unaudited financial reports, in 2008 the iwi was worth $17.2 million. but by 2014 that had dropped to just 2.6 million. That was blamed on a series of bad investments, including the purchase of a fishing vessel called the Shinji. I asked Mr White whether the iwi had made money from that investment.
No, that was a bad call.
Given that you're saying, you've made some bad calls, what have you done to be able to say to people that you can actually lead a runanga?
Well, I think they're quoting that we've lost quite a bit more than our treaty settlement. So somebody must have generated more than the 14.5 that we got from the Crown.
Given the state of Ngāti Tama's finances, I asked Mr White to explain why he was standing.
Well, I don't think there's anybody more passionate than me, or I don't think there can be anybody more passionate than me regarding Ngāti Tama affairs, and I'd just like to see the software that we have invested heavily in be able to be developed and completed, really.
Greg White resigned from his position of Chief Executive back in 2012, but he still represents Ngāti Tama at the Iwi Leaders Forum and on fisheries. While the financial reports show a loss of about $14 million during his time as CEO, he disagrees with that description.
Well, no, the trust invested in this, and I suppose it's whether or not you say that you use the word lost. It's an investment, and I think if you ever read of the Google Boys book, they were in a similar position to ourselves. And
so you're saying that what was reported in many papers at the time, $14.5 million came off your books, but you're saying it wasn't lost. In fact, it was invested, and you still have it.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it was invested in the IP that sits behind the software that we are in the process of selling.
Meanwhile, Mr Raumati, who is of Ngāti Mutunga and Ngāti Tama descent, says it's Beggar's belief that Mr White is running for a trustee position.
The ones that are coming back quickly are the ones who come around for a second bite, dear. You know what I mean? All my relations, they were here, they've been here, they've picked up the first lot, now they come back for the second lot, and they're the ones that are all on the list now.
8 people are running in Ngāti Tama's Runanga election, hoping to win one of 7 seats on the board. Voting in the board elections will take place next Saturday. For Checkpoint, this is Mihi Ngarangi Forbes.
Coming up at 6:30 on World Watch with John Greaves, the United Nations says Syria's agreed to let aid convoys into 7 besieged areas of the country, and oil ministers from Saudi Arabia, Russia, Venezuela and Qatar reach an agreement to freeze their country's output of crude. All of that in just over 9 minutes. The Vanuatu government has today signed a contract with Fulton Hogan to carry out emergency repairs to the runway at Port Vila's airport. Air New Zealand, Qantas and Virgin Australia last month stopped flying to the airport, citing concerns about the runway's safety. Radio New Zealand international reporter Johnny Blades is in the Wellington studio and joins us now. Johnny, are these emergency repairs which are different from permanent repairs?
They are, that's right. So this is just a short-term fix to see the airport through till later in the year. The work's going to take about 5 weeks, and then that will get them through to the peak tourist season and see them through till maybe October. The long-term solution for Bowfield runway will be.
Johnny, this has been known about for ages, right? I mean, the airlines have been sounding warnings, Air New Zealand in particular. Why has it taken so long to get to the point where even emergency repairs are being undertaken?
Well, basically the country's shambolic politics. By my calculation, they've had something like 12 changes of Prime Minister and configurations of government within the last 8 years. Wow. So successive governments have known about the problem, but no plan got off the ground. And actually some of the plans were rather dubious, like the government that's just been voted out at the recent snap election they were sort of toying with the idea of going with a deal offered by a Singapore tobacco company to revamp Vila Airport.
Yeah, it's pretty nutty stuff. How important is it that Vanuatu gets this right? Because they've had a terrible year with Cyclone Pam, the impact of this on tourism. They need to sort it fast, and they need the world to know they've sorted it, right?
That's right, it's very important. Tourism, as you know, is the main revenue earner for Vanuatu, and they were just on their knees after Cyclone Pam last March. But, they have this new government showing some signs that they're really, they're acting urgently, that's one good thing, I suppose, but they're talking about a master plan for the airport scene, and they might even not relocate, but make another major international airport in the main northern island, Santo, which is actually the biggest island and most populated island in Vanuatu. But as you probably know, the whole tourism industry is centred around Port Vila, and Santo is a sort of a distant second. But it's got huge potential, it's absolutely beautiful. And they've got a great piece of land for a big runway for the long-haul flights. So elements of this government are really pushing for them to, as well as upgrading Port Vila for a decent amount of years later in the year, getting this one in Santo up to scratch so that they can have the two major airports and give their tourism industry the best chance of really rocking.
Johnny Blades from Radio New Zealand International. Thanks, Johnny. After the big earthquakes in Christchurch, perhaps the earthquake scientist heard from more than any other was Dr. Mark Quigley from the University of Canterbury. He was the Canadian research scientist who came to Christchurch to teach and found himself living through the kind of earthquakes he'd previously only studied from afar. He was then offered a position as Associate Professor of Active Tectonics at the University of Melbourne, and he lives there now. But his interest in Christchurch and his knowledge of what's happening beneath it remains significant. We decided to ask him some of the questions arising from Sunday's shake, beginning with, was it an aftershock or a new earthquake?
By all statistical measures, it's an aftershock. It's an earthquake that's occurred in the aftershock region. It's not occurred in a completely different area that we didn't know about. It's occurred within this region. It's an earthquake that's smaller in magnitude than the Darfield earthquake and some of the other larger earthquakes in the sequence. So by all intents and purposes, it's an aftershock. And I think one of the main things we need to realize is that earthquakes that happen years apart may seem like a long time apart for us in the human timescale, but on the geological timescale, that's a blink of an eye. So, these things are almost happening synchronously in terms of the geology of the area.
Right. Well, okay, that makes sense. The other thing that I think people are confused about is there seems to be a lot of earthquakes up and down the South Island. One south of the South Island this morning, quite a few lately at the top of the South Island. Are they all related or are they disconnected?
So the areas that we're getting a lot of earthquakes recently are areas where we always get a lot of earthquakes. So that area is south of the South Island there. I mean, that's a very, very seismically active part of the plate boundary. And not a tremendously large earthquake for that particular setting there. In terms of this effect, this far-field effect of one earthquake in one place on another, again, it's really an unresolved issue. We have these models for how a magnitude 6 earthquake in one place may rattle around faults hundreds to even thousands of kilometers away and just induce minor changes that may push them over the edge, so to speak. But it's a very, very difficult hypothesis to test. So we know that they cluster a bit, but we're still not exactly sure whether there's a real provable link between them.
Right. And the final thing that I think people would love clarified is the projection business. So we hear things like there is a 49% chance of a greater than 5 magnitude earthquake. Suddenly it's a 60% chance in the next 12 months. What is that based on? Is that based on mathematical probability given what has happened previously?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's an expert group of scientists that have collectively decided on which sort of statistical models best describe what's already happened and therefore are the models that are most likely to capture the range of future scenarios going forward. So I guess in that camp, what you would say is the more earthquakes that we're having, the higher probability there is to have more future earthquakes. And they may not be on exactly the same fault. I mean, I think that's something that leads to a lot of confusion. So, for instance, when we have a magnitude 6 earthquake on a fault, it doesn't mean we have a higher probability of getting another magnitude 6 on that specific fault. It means we have a higher probability of getting a magnitude 6 somewhere in the area that's been influenced by that fault, not on the fault itself. So the more earthquakes we have, the higher the probability. I don't think we should get too fussed about whether something's 49 or 55 or 45 because there's so much error and uncertainty in those estimates on their own anyways. I think what we need to do is say there's a much higher probability now than there ever was before 2010 of happening damaging earthquakes in the region. So we just need to be more diligent in that, from that perspective.
Yeah, there was a sense that that diligence, which was very much part of life in Christchurch, and you witnessed it firsthand living there at the time, had given way to a more relaxed existence. People were caught out by Sunday's quake, weren't they?
Yeah, but that's human nature, man. I mean, you can't just be on eggshells for years and years and years of your life. You've got to move on. It's just what we all have to do. So I think it's just kind of about trying to think of your own setting, trying to think of things that you can do to just make sure you're safe. I mean, I'm still stunned when I go to Christchurch and go into a bar and have a drink and see just tons of bottles, unsupported, sitting on the ledges. And we're still surprised that they fall off and hit people and smash and people lose thousands of dollars. There's a whole bunch of things that we can do, very, very simple things that still aren't being done after all we've been through. We just have to kind of get a bit of a permanent cultural shift, and then we'll probably be able to be more relaxed about the range of things that Mother Nature throws at us.
Mark, I know you have to go and do other stuff, but you were such a big part of the response to the 2010 and 2011 earthquakes. In the media constantly, I don't know how many times I interviewed you. Do you miss it all, living in Melbourne?
Well, I was on my way to Christchurch when that earthquake occurred. I'd been out in the Southern Alps doing a bit of field work, and I can tell you it just brought back all the rush of old feelings straight away. And I mean, I just feel so connected to Christchurch and everything that we've gone through. And so I guess there's elements of me wishing that I was there so I could try to help, try to do some stuff. But, a lot of people, we just moved on, and we've got different lives and different priorities and things like that now. So obviously I'm keen to do what I can to help. I'm thinking about Christchurch all the time. But life goes on too.
Mark Quigley, a piece of feedback from Christchurch about the traffic. Alan says, John, try Christchurch traffic. 30 minutes for 1K down Lincoln Road. Yep, Alan, that would drive you nuts. Thanks for listening, everyone. We will be back tomorrow night at 5 o'clock.
You're listening to RNZ National. We're at 6:30. Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Tonight, France extends a state of emergency for another 3 months. A meeting of ASEAN leaders ends in California, and the UN's Human Rights Office issues a warning to Western Australia. Those stories and more in World Watch PM. But first tonight, Russia's bluntly rejected claims by Turkey that it's committed war crimes in Syria. Turkey's Prime Minister accused Russian forces of carrying out missile attacks on a number of hospitals and schools in Syria, in which scores of people were killed. In another development, the United Nations says Syria's agreed to let aid convoys into 7